My name is Clara. I am 76 years old, and for more than 2 decades I lived with constant pain in my hands. Arthritis, the doctors said. Degenerative, chronic, incurable. Every morning, before putting a foot on the floor, I already felt my hands stiff, as if they had turned to stone overnight. I tried everything. Anti-inflammatory pills that damaged my stomach, cold and hot creams, with and without prescription, massages with rosemary oil, patches, paraffin baths, physical therapy sessions, alternative therapies. Some things helped for a moment, but none solved the problem. The pain always came back. Always. For years, I learned to live with the idea that this discomfort would be part of me forever. I became slower to dress, clumsier at cutting food, more dependent. I was ashamed to ask for help, but sometimes I had no choice. Arthritis was silently stealing my autonomy. Until by chance I heard about a natural oil. Not a miraculous or trendy one that a neighbor had been using for a long time and said it had restored mobility in her fingers. I confess I didn't believe it at first. How could something so simple work when nothing else had? But I decided to try it. I used it skeptically, without expectations. The first day, I didn't feel much. The second, something changed. And on the 5th day, the pain that accompanied me every morning, the one that had become part of my life, simply wasn't there. That's why I'm here. Not to sell you anything, nor to promise magical cures. I just want to tell you what worked for me. Maybe it will help you. Maybe, as it happened to me, it will give you a little hope back. Before continuing, I would love to know a little more about you. How old are you, and from where are you listening to me? What is arthritis in the hands, and what is it like to live with it? Arthritis in the hands is not just pain. It's a silent way of losing small parts of your life without noticing, until one day you stop and see everything you can no longer do. At first it seemed temporary, a slight tingling in the fingers in the morning, as if I had slept badly. Then came stiffness. It was hard to close my fist. The fingers were swollen and moved as if they weren't mine. Later, the pain arrived to stay. It wasn't sharp, like when you get hurt. It was dull, deep, tired, as if my hands silently complained with every movement. Doctors called it rheumatoid arthritis. I called it a trap that was taking away my strength, precision, and spirit. Simple things like opening a jar became challenges. Leaving a button fastened was a victory. Writing a letter, a punishment. Even cooking, which was one of my passions, became frustrating. How to chop an onion if you can't hold the knife? Beyond the physical pain, there is the other thing, what no one explains to you, the feeling of uselessness, of being a burden. One morning, while trying to put on a blouse and failing to close the buttons, I broke down crying. Not because of the button, but because of everything I could no longer control, because I felt useless. Before arthritis, my hands were strong. I could carry grocery bags, wash clothes by hand, cut garden branches. I was 60 years old and felt young. Now, 10 years later, I felt trapped in a body that did not want to obey. The worst part is that from the outside, no one notices. Hands don't scream, they don't bleed, they don't wear casts, but they hurt. A lot. Every everyday gesture becomes a negotiation with the pain. Is it worth writing that note by hand? Can I open that door alone? What do I do if the cup falls and I can't pick it up? That is life with arthritis in the hands. It's not just about pain. It's about adapting to a reality where your own hands betray you. It's about losing small things every day. And the worst is that you learn to live like this, as if it were normal, as if there were no other option. But what I want you to know is that even when it seems everything is lost, sometimes a small change is enough to start recovering what you thought was forgotten. That was what happened to me when I discovered that oil. But I'll tell you that later. Day to day with arthritis, frustrations, fears, and dependence. Every morning began with a small struggle. Even before opening my eyes, I already knew the pain would be there, waiting for me. My hands woke swollen, stiff, as if they belonged to someone else. Trying to move the fingers was like forcing an old rusty gear that creaked when turning. Sometimes I stayed in bed for a few minutes just staring at the ceiling, hoping the stiffness would go away on its own, but it never completely did. Lifting the breakfast cup was a test. Holding the comb to fix my hair was an exercise in patience. And don't even mention cold days. In winter, I felt as if the very air sneaked into the joints and froze them from the inside. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, not because of insomnia, but because every time I moved my hand, a dull throb reminded me I couldn't forget the arthritis, not even while sleeping. Simple tasks stopped being simple. Cutting nails, holding a supermarket bag, writing a note for my granddaughter. Even holding the steering wheel while driving became something I had to plan ahead. If I knew I had to drive, I didn't use my hands for anything else in the morning to avoid tiring them. I started depending more on others, on my daughter to help open jars, on my neighbor to reach heavy things from the shelf, on the pharmacy to deliver pills that kept me functional, even if only for a few hours. At first it was only occasionally, then every day, then several times a day. And with that dependence came fear. Fear that arthritis would worsen, that one day I wouldn't be able to dress myself, that I'd have to ask for help even to go to the bathroom. Nobody wants to feel like a burden, especially after a lifetime of independence. But what hurt the most wasn't the pain. It was feeling that every week I lost a part of myself. It wasn't a sudden fall, but a slow decline, as if every day someone switched off a small light inside me, one that maybe would never turn on again. I felt my independence slipping away little by little, and with it, my security, my spirit, my desire to do things. I began avoiding going out, refusing invitations, staying home where at least the environment was familiar and easier to handle. But even there, among my things, I felt limited. My own hands, that had worked so much, caressed, cooked, and cared, now seemed foreign, as if they no longer belonged to me. That was my daily life with arthritis, a life closing in, unnoticed by anyone, except you. Everything I tried that didn't work. When they tell you you have arthritis, they also tell you it has no cure, that all you can do is learn to live with it. But no one teaches you how to live with chronic pain. So you begin a sort of pilgrimage, from doctor to doctor, looking for even a small relief, a partial solution, a break. I started with anti-inflammatories. They prescribed them as something basic, almost automatic. I took one every morning, another at noon, another at night. For a time I felt some relief, but at the cost of my stomach. I began having heartburn, nausea, and a constant discomfort that forced me to take more pills to counter the effects of the first ones. Then came physical therapy. Twice a week I went to a clinic where a kind young woman helped me move my fingers, applied heat, taught me exercises. It helped, yes, but only while I was doing it. 2 days without going was enough for everything to return to the same. Besides, it was hard to get there, and each session was expensive. Soon I had to stop. Then came home remedies. Recipes from friends, advice from neighbors, secrets from magazines. I rubbed alcohol with rosemary, used hot compresses with eucalyptus leaves, wrapped my hands in hot vinegar with coarse salt, prepared turmeric and ginger infusions. Some calmed me for a while, others did absolutely nothing. But when you are desperate, you try everything. I also tried natural supplements, glucosamine, collagen, omega-3, turmeric capsules. I took so many I felt more like a pharmacy than a person. And yet, the pain was still there every morning, as if none of it mattered. I went back to doctors, rheumatologists, internists, even alternative medicine specialists. Some listened patiently, others prescribed without looking me in the eyes. I received new prescriptions every month, each promising this time it would work. But nothing really changed. The relief was always partial, always temporary, and the price, physical and emotional, was increasingly high. Every time something didn't work, I felt myself resign more to living with pain, as if part of me began accepting this would be my life forever, that there was nothing more to do, that I had to adapt. And the worst is that when you get used to the pain, you stop looking for solutions. You become more passive, more closed, more tired. I was reaching that point. Until one day, without looking, something different appeared. Something that didn't promise miracles, but offered me a bit of real relief. It wasn't a medicine. It was an oil.
But to understand why I decided to try it, first you have to know how that moment was.
How I discovered the oil, the day everything changed. I wasn't looking for anything new that day. To be honest, I had stopped trying. I was at home having coffee with Carmen, a lifelong neighbor who came to see me occasionally. She is also in her 80s, 81, and carries her own pains. But that afternoon, I noticed something different. She walked better, moved her hands more freely, and above all, didn't complain about anything. That was already strange. I asked her directly, "Carmen, what are you doing differently?" She smiled as if she were waiting for that question and took from her bag a small dark bottle with a label I didn't recognize.
"It's oil," she told me, "but not just any. A friend's sister recommended it to me. She brings it from a farm in the south. Natural." I didn't believe in these things, but look at my hands.
She showed them to me. Her knuckles, which used to be swollen like little stones, looked softer. Not perfect, but better. Much better. She said she had been using it for barely a week and noticed results by the second or third day. I took the bottle in my hands. The glass was warm from the sun. I opened it. It had a strong but pleasant smell, with a herbal touch I couldn't identify at that moment. It reminded me of the countryside. Something old, trustworthy. I carefully poured some onto my palm and felt a dense, slightly thick texture that slid easily. Not greasy, but enveloping. Warm. I didn't say anything to Carmen at that moment, but while she talked about how she applied it, the circular movements, the routine she had adopted every night before sleeping, I had already made a silent decision. Not because I believed it would cure me, but because I had nothing left to try. I would do it as a last resort. I didn't expect miracles. I just needed something. That very night, before going to bed, I applied it. Carefully, as she explained, massaging the knuckles, palms, each finger. I took my time. I had nothing to lose. It was the first step toward a change I didn't expect. A change that began quietly, but that, with the days, became impossible to ignore. And that's how my story with that oil began. First day of use. What I felt, how I applied it, what I noticed. That first night I sat on the edge of the bed with the bottle in my hand. I had no expectations, no illusions. Just a small curiosity sparked after seeing Carmen so different. There was something in her voice, in her way of moving, that made me think, what if it works? I poured a few drops of the oil into my palm. Not much was needed. A few drops were enough to cover both hands. I rubbed it gently between my fingers and then began to massage. First the palms, then the knuckles, one by one, with slow, circular movements. I took my time, as if it were a small ritual. The texture of the oil was dense but smooth, sliding effortlessly over the skin. As I massaged, I felt a strange warmth, not hot, but comforting, as if my hands were gradually relaxing, as if they were breathing. The smell was strong at first, a mix of herbal and slightly citrus, but soon became pleasant, almost familiar. I stayed like that for a while, sitting, with my hands soaked in that scent, feeling a slight internal vibration. It wasn't magic. The pain didn't disappear. But I did notice something different, a small relief, a kind of rest inside the hand. It was as if the tension had eased a little, not completely, but enough for me to notice. It wasn't miraculous, but it was different. That night I slept better, not because the pain was gone, but because something inside me was calmer. Maybe it was simply the fact of having done something for myself, without expecting results, without expecting anything. Maybe it was hope, which unknowingly had begun to return. The next day, I repeated the routine, and the next as well. And with each night, something in my hands began to change. But I'll tell you about that later. From the second to the fourth day, real improvements, hope returns. The second day I woke up with the usual routine, slowly moving fingers, feeling stiffness, preparing for another day with pain. But there was one detail that made me stop. It didn't hurt as much. The fingers were still somewhat stiff, yes, but not like before. I could close them with less effort. I even rested my whole palm on the table, something I hadn't done in weeks. At first, I didn't give it much importance. I thought it was a coincidence. Maybe I had slept better, or the weather was helping. But at night, I repeated the oil massage, this time with a little more intention. Not just a desperate attempt, but part of a small routine I was beginning to enjoy deep down. The third day was even clearer. My hands were no longer so swollen on waking. I could move my fingers more easily. Holding the spoon didn't hurt. I opened my bedroom window without pushing with my elbow. These were small things, almost insignificant for anyone. But for me, they were huge. And that same morning, something happened I will never forget. I wanted to eat an apple. Before, peeling them was torture. Holding the knife, gripping the fruit firmly, turning the wrist, all that had become almost impossible. But that day, without much thought, I tried. I grabbed the knife. I felt it firm in my hand. I placed the apple on the board. I began turning it slowly. And when I realized it, I had it completely peeled. I stared at that apple for a long time. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I was moved by something as simple as peeling an apple without help. But it wasn't just the fruit. It was what it represented. It was a silent proof that maybe something was working. The fourth day, I confirmed what I already suspected. My hands were changing, not only physically, but also how I felt them. I wrote a small message to my granddaughter again. I tied my shoelaces without calling anyone. I turned on the radio, gently turning the knob. And most importantly, my spirit began to change. Where there had been frustration, now there was curiosity. Where there had been resignation, a word I hadn't dared to say for a long time returned. Hope. On the fifth day, the key moment, chronic pain disappears. I remember that morning as if it were yesterday. It was the fifth day since I started using the oil. I didn't do anything different the night before. I applied the massage as it had become a habit and went to bed with warm hands, wrapped in that herbal scent I was already associating with relief. But that morning was different. I opened my eyes without hurry. As always, the first thing I did was move my hands. I was so used to the pain that my body anticipated it. But something was not right. Or better said, something was too good. It didn't hurt. I moved one finger, then another. I slowly closed my palm. I waited for the usual stab, the one that always greeted me as a silent reminder of arthritis. But it didn't come. I sat on the bed, confused. I looked at my hands as if they were strangers. They were there, the same hands that had been screaming at me every morning for years, but this time in silence. I observed them for a few seconds. I turned them. I touched them. And then I did the unthinkable. I closed my fist completely. They didn't hurt, not even closing the fist. I couldn't believe it. It wasn't a partial improvement. It wasn't a simple pain reduction. It was absence. It was peace in my joints for the first time in so many years, I couldn't even remember how it felt. I got up slowly, went to the kitchen, turned on the tap, held a cup, filled it with water. No discomfort, no stiffness, no resistance. Everything flowed, like before. Like when I didn't think about my hands because they just worked. And then I sat down, put the cup on the table, and started to cry. They were not sad tears. They were tears of disbelief, relief, gratitude. It was as if someone had taken away an invisible weight I had been carrying for years without realizing it. It wasn't just the pain that had gone. It was also fear, helplessness, dependence. That day I understood that the body has memory, that when you treat it with respect, when you give it a chance, sometimes it responds. Sometimes it gives you more than you expected. Sometimes it simply surprises you. And it all began with a small bottle of oil. What does this oil have? Natural properties explained simply. After that 5th day, and with the pain practically gone, I began asking myself questions. What was that oil? What did it contain that made it so different from everything I had tried? It wasn't magic. It wasn't an illusion. Something real was happening in my body, and I wanted to understand it. I started researching. I read labels, looked in books, asked my daughter, who has always been curious about natural remedies. And over time I discovered that what was in that bottle was not a single miraculous ingredient, but a powerful mix of simple things. Natural, with centuries of history behind them. One of the main components was hemp oil, rich in essential fatty acids like omega-3 and omega-6, known for their anti-inflammatory effects. It is an oil that absorbs quickly and penetrates the deep layers of the skin, calming from within. It also had arnica, a plant that for generations has been used to relieve bruises, muscle and joint pain. Its calming effect is almost immediate, but what surprised me most was learning that it helps improve circulation, which reduces swelling and the sensation of stiffness. Another ingredient was ginger. I knew it as a seasoning, but I had no idea that applied to the skin, it could help reduce inflammation. It has a gentle, constant heat that relaxes muscles and soothes discomfort. And then there was lavender. Not only for its aroma, which itself calms nerves, but also because it has relaxing properties for tissues. When applied, the sensation of relief is more complete. Not just physical, but emotional. It's as if the whole body sighs. Some oils also included turmeric, which is another very powerful natural anti-inflammatory, or rosemary oil, which stimulates circulation, or even clove, known for its ability to numb sensitive and painful areas. I didn't learn all this at once. I discovered it little by little because I wanted to know why I was feeling so good. And the more I read, the more I understood that nature often has answers that modern medicine does not always consider. I even found studies, not complicated or full of strange words, that talked about how these ingredients, combined, could significantly reduce joint pain in older people. It wasn't a new secret. It was something many had already tried before. I was just discovering it. Not all oils are the same, of course. You have to pay attention to quality, to the mix, to how they are prepared. But when they are well made, and especially when used consistently and carefully, they can make a big difference. And that was, for me, the great revelation, that it wasn't something magical. It was something real, tangible, with a foundation. And that made sense. How to use the oil correctly, daily routine and tips. After noticing the changes, I understood it wasn't enough just to have the oil. There was a correct way to use it, and also things that, if done well, boosted its effect. Because it's not just what you use, but how you use it. I followed a very simple but consistent routine. I applied it twice a day, once in the morning, right after waking up, and once at night, before going to bed. I didn't need large amounts. A few drops were enough to cover both hands. The bottle lasted me weeks. Each time I took my time. I warmed the oil a little between my palms so it wasn't cold. Then I started massaging gently, using my thumbs to press lightly on the most painful areas. I went finger by finger, knuckle by knuckle, feeling how the skin absorbed it little by little. Then I made circular movements on the palm, and finally stretched the fingers outward, as if returning them to their shape. I never did it in a hurry. That moment became a space for me, like a pause in the day, a small act of self-care. Another important detail was heat. Whenever I could, after applying the oil, I wrapped my hands in a warm towel. The heat helped it penetrate better and also relaxed much more. Sometimes I used a soft cloth glove to retain that heat during the night. I also discovered that doing gentle stretches before the massage increased effectiveness. Nothing forced, just opening and closing hands slowly, moving wrists in circles, stretching fingers one by one. It was barely 5 minutes, but it helped circulation activate and the oil spread better. And no less important, drinking water. Something as basic as staying well hydrated made a huge difference. I hadn't thought about it, but keeping the body hydrated helps tissues recover faster and joints to be less inflamed. As for the bottle, I kept it in a cool place, away from direct light. A drawer in my nightstand was its place for a long time. I always had it at hand, as if it were part of my life. Not a strange product, but a small, silent ally. After sharing my story with friends and neighbors, something curious began to happen. Without looking for it, I started hearing other voices, other stories similar to mine. Older people like me, who had lived years with pain, and who had also found unexpected hope in this oil. The first to tell me was Marta, a former co-worker. She is 79 and has psoriatic arthritis, a very aggressive form that affects not only joints, but also the skin. She called me one day, excited, to say she had been using the oil for 5 days, and that for the first time in a long time, she had been able to button her blouse without help. I felt young again, she told me, and I couldn't help but smile on the other side of the phone. Then it was Luis, a man of 83, a neighbor of my nephew. He was a carpenter all his life, and over time his hands began to deform from osteoarthritis. He wrote me a letter with shaky but firm handwriting, telling me that on the 3rd day of use, he had managed to hold a tool without dropping it. "I don't want to work again," he joked, "but I do want to feel like I can again." And then there is Elena, with whom I share reading classes at the senior center. She is 75 and has lived with rheumatoid arthritis for more than 15 years. She confessed that at first she didn't believe in anything natural, that she only trusted prescribed medications. But after hearing my experience, she decided to try. Today, after using the oil for a week, she says she has stopped using her thermal gloves inside the house. And that, for her, is a big achievement. The most interesting thing was seeing that, although each one had a different type of arthritis and a different pain story, they all agreed on one thing. With consistency, relief came quickly. None talked about a definitive cure or something miraculous, but they did talk about real, tangible, visible changes. Less swollen hands, more natural movements, less intense pain, or directly absent, and above all, a new feeling, regaining control. A common pattern repeated itself. Those who applied the oil twice a day, calmly, following a routine similar to mine, began to notice improvements in less than a week. It's not magic, it's consistency, it's self-care, it's not giving up. And hearing Marta, Luis, Elena made me feel accompanied. It was no longer just me. We were many, all with our stories, our tired bodies, but our intact will. Today, after all I have lived, I can say something with complete honesty. I am not cured. Arthritis doesn't go away. It doesn't disappear by magic. It's still there, somewhere. But it no longer dominates me. It no longer decides for me. I am no longer afraid to wake up in the mornings. I don't anticipate the pain before moving my fingers. I don't feel my hands betraying me. On the contrary, I feel they are mine again. This oil was not a definitive solution, but it was a door, a small entry to another way of caring for myself. It gave me back something I had lost without realizing it. The hope that I could still improve, that not everything was lost just because of aging or illness. And for that, with my heart in my hand, I invite you to try it. Without impossible expectations, without empty promises, just with an open mind, with the willingness to give yourself another chance. Because sometimes relief doesn't come from the hospital, but from nature, and from giving yourself a new chance. Today, when I apply the oil, I am not only caring for my hands, I am caring for my spirit, my independence, my dignity. It is a small but profound act. If you are also tired of living with pain, don't close yourself off. You lose nothing by trying. And maybe like me, you'll discover that what you needed wasn't more medication, but a little consistency, a touch of nature, and faith in yourself. Thank you for accompanying me this far. I am glad to have shared this story with you.
And now I ask you, have you tried any natural remedy that surprised you? Which one was it?
I read you with much affection in the comments.